So we can talk about package managers today. I'm super pumped about this. I have not used all these products. I stopped being a useful member of society and writing software a while back, and so some of these things post-date me. But I'm really excited to do it. So I'll quickly kind of let people introduce themselves, although I think you might know a lot of the people here. If they don't sufficiently brag about their accomplishments, I will interject and do it for them, and that is a threat. So you should. I'm looking at Alex, who seems a little quieter in particular, and I have some fun data points about Alex just in case he's too quiet. But Alex, why don't you introduce yourself and why you're on a package management panel?
Yeah, definitely. Hello, everyone. I work for a company called Fermyon. I'm doing WebAssembly stuff nowadays, but in my past, I did a lot of work on Rust, the programming language, and primarily Rust, the package or Cargo, the package manager. So I kind of helped Cargo develop that from its initial seed, develop that up to 1.0, and kind of maintain it for quite a long time. Lots of fun features there, all that fun stuff.
How prolific a Rust developer would you say you are?
If you look at the commit counts of Rust over time, for every contribution ever made to Rust, I think, half of them.
It's insane.
Yeah, very, very, very prolific.
Charlie, you're up next. You should follow that. No, I'm just kidding. No. Charlie, why are you on a package manager panel? Anyway.
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm Charlie. I work on Python tooling. I run a company called Astral, so we build high-performance Python tooling written in Rust. So I spend all my time writing Rust to try and make the Python ecosystem better. I built two things, I guess, that are notable. One is called Ruff. It's a Python linter, code formatter, and sort of code transformation tool. And the other that I guess is more relevant for this is a few months ago, we released a tool called UV. So if you've used pip before, it's kind of like a pip rewrite in Rust. It's a Python package manager that's very focused on performance and trying to be really, really fast at everything it does.
How many people here have been miffed how frequently Ruff is on the top of Hacker News? No. No, it's fantastic. And I should say one of my favorite parts about the launch announcement for UV, aside from, by the way, also working closely with Armin on Rye and taking over stewardship of that project, was one of the descriptions, the pithy descriptions of UV was cargo for Python.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, everything we do is like very Rust inspired. And so, yeah, we can talk about that more, but that's been a big part of what we're trying to build.
Isaac, why don't you tell us why you're on this panel?
I wrote NPM and did a startup, and I don't know. I think that's
he can just stop.
Well, no, but specifically, it's because I'm working on Volt now, which is sort of like NPM but faster and with some paid features.
And again, just to make it fun, we did a little call, as you might imagine. I feel like I'm on like a late night talk show host. Like there was a secret call before that we talked about some of this. And one of the funnier things is, as Charlie in his blog post described it, and I called out, "Oh, you're doing cargo for Python," and Alex very kindly said, "We were building NPM for Rust." I think, which was a really cool moment. And then yes, you're working on Volt, which is TBD or TBA, or it's been announced but not launched, new.
Yeah, it takes some time to build things like this, to like rebuild a package manager from first principles.
Yeah.
Takes
I wouldn't know anything about that, no, but it's very cool.
Me neither.
Okay, so you guys are all working or have worked on package managers that I think are pretty critical and folks are very aware of. Why? Why are you working on package managers? Why did you, in all of your cases, maybe start working on them when you did? What were the things that kind of got you doing it, maybe an acute pain point, and also perhaps on the upside case, like what inspired you to do it? Maybe we'll start with Isaac, since NPM I think is the longest tenured one, and I think there's also a good opportunity to talk about the reasons, inspiration for Volt as well.
Yeah, thanks. So there's really two questions here. One is why did I make a package manager in the first place, and the other is why am I doing it again? And I mean, arguably the answer to both questions is the same. I have problems, but glutton for punishment. NPM. So like in the early days of Node, it was there was this mailing list with like a couple dozen, maybe as many as 200 people on it, and almost every day there'd be several messages that are like, "Hi, I wrote this thing. You can use this thing in Node, and all you have to do is like download it and check it out, and check out the submodules and run make, and then copy this file over here." And it was just like, this sucks. So yeah, I wrote a script that was just doing all the steps that I was having to do manually to play with other people's code. And yeah, that kind of got somewhat popular, and then I quit my job to work on it, so it got really popular because there was actually somebody maintaining it. And so the other 3 package managers that were around in Node at the time kind of were forgotten and fell into history. Then why am I doing it again? Well, basically Darcy Clark, who I worked with at NPM Inc. and then at GitHub.
Who is also here somewhere.
He's right over there. He had this idea like, hey, GitHub bought NPM and there was a bunch of stuff that we wanted to do, but then we didn't do any of it because it got kind of like pulled into the big megacorp of, Microsoft's subsidiary or whatever. So let's like get the band back together and do those things. And I remember you and I had a call where we were kind of like trying to convince each other to get involved before I'd really like signed on as co-founder and you'd signed on as investor. And now here we are. We did a bunch of, I was skeptical that like build a new package manager was actually the solution. I thought that was maybe like my own bias just because that's what I have fun doing. But we did a bunch of customer calls. We, really poked at what people's pain points were. And like, they want a faster package manager. Everybody's using PNPM because it's the fastest and not really for any other reason. And they're paying money for things to make stuff go faster in their builds. Well, we could do a lot better. I mean, we took a look at PNPM. We're like, this is great. Like, it's a good package manager, but it's leaving a lot of optimization opportunities on the table. Let's do those.
Hold on, I'm gonna rewind again, because this is great, and we'll come back to the going forward. And what, like, at the time when I think one of the cool things is, particularly about open source, is you're all still relatively young, and I expect you to have good memories. You don't have to, but when you were getting started with NPM, what was like your inspiration? Like, not like obviously there's an acute pain point. You were just, as you mentioned, this is what I was doing every time, and I just wrote a script to handle it all at once. But it's a big undertaking. Even when it's just getting started, it gets big pretty quickly. What do you look at as your predecessors? Where did you draw inspiration from in terms of what to build and why?
So the closest predecessor was probably Wyinst, which was Yahoo's package manager. Wyinst was like CPAN for NPM. So, and NPM is like Wyinst for JavaScript. So really your thing is based on CPAN. But like, I don't know, great-great-great-grandparent or something.
This is inspiring and depressing at the same time.
But yeah, in terms of it being a big undertaking, I mean, I feel like you have to have a certain amount of like insane hubris to want to make interesting things in software, because it is always a huge undertaking, and you have to kind of convince yourself that it's achievable, even though like rationally it's probably a terrible idea. It just takes a tremendous amount of time and effort.
Totally. Yeah, one thing I looked into before this, because I was kind of curious, is so CPAN, I think, was first launched in like 1993. And then Maven was 2004, I think, which is probably the first package manager or kind of that I used for that, like repository that I used for that.
Pear was in there somewhere too.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a few others, but for me, and we talked about this a little on the call, like it seems obvious in hindsight that we had all these tools for it and that people were working on it, but it is not obvious. It was not trivial. One reason why is at the time CPAN launches, like, it sounds, among computer people, the internet exists, but it's not the biggest thing in the world. Like distributing software around is non-trivial that way. So that's one part of it. Version control still lived for a long time in a prior era before distributed version control and things like Git would develop. And that caused challenges. And then one thing that I called it on the call that I think, at least to me, was a seminal moment, and I don't know if we have any Heroku people here. I probably should invite some, but is Heroku kind of used package managers as like a standardization for how they would do build and deploy. And where Ruby, I think, had a solid story here, a bunch of other languages didn't yet have a robust solution, didn't yet have maybe a known winner. It was kind of a multi-horse race, and all of a sudden there had to be some push towards kind of a choice for each language. Okay, Charlie.
The question is, will I work on this stuff?
Yeah.
Why? So I think, maybe not starting with UV, but starting with ruff. Like when I first started working on ruff, it was really inspired by my own work. Like I only started writing Rust like a year and a half or maybe 2 years ago. And most of my career has been Python, TypeScript. And in my last job, I was like maintaining a big Python code base, and we were kind of fighting the tools a lot, even at our scale. And so, I started working on ruff. I was like, can we build much faster Python tooling in Rust? I was very inspired by a lot of what I was seeing Well, I was inspired by the Rust tool chain, and then I was inspired by what I was seeing in the web, where like app sizes were getting larger and larger. They had all these things that they were running locally. They had like minification, bundling, transpilation, and so more and more of that tooling was being written in not JavaScript, and that hadn't really happened to Python at all. And so Ruff for me was kind of testing this hypothesis of like, could we do the same thing for Python? Could we build like much faster tooling with ideally very few trade-offs? And I released it. I didn't really know if people would care about it. Turns out people like really cared about it. There were a lot of big projects that started to adopt it almost immediately. I was building this we were building this totally crazy thing. I had this like Rust-based linter. We were on version like 0.0.194. I was releasing twice a day, and projects like Pandas and SciPy were adopting it, right? Like decades old projects. And that to me was like, okay, people are really, I don't want to say desperate, but like people really, there's like
I'm not using Pandas as my next project now.
Yeah, well, there's a serious appetite for this stuff. Like Python to me, it's had such an amazing ecosystem and community, but it sometimes thrives, I think, in spite of its tooling rather than because of its tooling. And that was the thing I was saying, was all these projects were like, we want this stuff. Let's make any excuse we can to adopt it, basically. And like a linter, right? Like, how often are you like jumping out to like migrate your linter? So like the amount of demand that we saw there, it was very quickly apparent to me that like there were just a lot of other opportunities in the stack. And for Python in particular, when I wanted to do packaging from the start, really, we only started working on it in October. But for me, it was always a huge opportunity because whenever we go out to build something new, the question we have to ask ourselves is like, can we build something that's like so significantly better that people will actually like put in the investment and the energy to adopt it and use it? Because like you can build something that's like a little bit better, but like being able to build something that's so compelling and the trade-offs are so good that they will actively move to it is much harder. So the thing for us was always like, can we build something, whenever we look at anything we want to build, it's like, can we build something that we think is, let's just randomly say like 10 times better? Can we build something that's just much, much better? And I really thought we could for packaging. So for me, it was like, the need in the Python ecosystem to have better solutions to package management. A lot of inspiration from other ecosystems in terms of how they'd solve this problem, like what modern package managers looked like and the things that they were doing that I wasn't seeing being applied to Python. And just a strong desire to like bring those ideas and that energy and that kind of like development expertise, like mostly not through me, but through other people that I convinced to come work on this stuff, into Python to try and make everyone more productive.
This is just kind of a curiosity question as you were telling the story. So one of the cool things for you is you could look in particular at JavaScript, but there's also other communities like Rust and say, here's what's going on in those communities. I'm curious, did you reach out to, other folks who'd worked on those tools in JavaScript at any point to say, how has it gone? Talk to them at all, or did you just get to see what was on GitHub, basically?
No, I would say I'm like pretty ignorant in general about how people solve problems, at least going into them. Like everything I've built in the past like 2 years, I had really no experience building any of it. Like I didn't know anything about building a package manager before I started, which is maybe a little bit different. And like, and with Ruff, like one of the reasons I started working on Ruff, which is like a little bit embarrassing to admit, but it was like, I wanted to actually really learn Rust. And so like I'd written some Rust, but I was always trying to get like in and out of it as quickly as possible. And for me, I was like, I need to build something from scratch if I'm really going to learn the language. And like that, over time, the thing that happens, and Taylor was talking about this in the last panel a little bit, is, every time we make a decision, we're now asking, we're asking ourselves like, how do other people solve this problem? Like, it's not like I did a bunch of research in advance, but it's like as we were approached with problems, I would say, how do other linters solve this? How do other tools solve this? Because very rarely are you solving like a net, completely new problem. That was true too with like with our formatter. I mean, I see Viju is here who worked on Prettier, and like there's kind of like this train of inspiration, like Prettier, like very heavily influenced Rome, which became Biome, and then when we wrote our formatter, one of the first people that I hired on our team came from Rome, and so like our architecture is like also very indirectly like influenced by Prettier. Like one of the amazing things about open source is like you can you just look things up and like learn about how people do stuff. And we've now done that like more and more too with like Cargo. Like we look at how Cargo solves certain problems, all that.
Yeah, Vue's here. Yeah, it's prettier, and there's a bunch of other things. Yoga, right? There's a whole bunch of projects. If you don't know, feel free to go up and thank him. Okay, Alex, how did you get involved in Rust and Cargo? And why?
Oh, Rust is easy. That was where I rewrote my school compiler in Rust, and I was like, oh my god, this language sucks because there's so many bugs in it. So I started fixing it, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. And I kept
That's easy.
But for Cargo, I would describe myself as a sweet summer child with a twinkle in his eye, and I was so naive and thought, oh sure, I've never done this before. I'm a year out of college. I can write a package manager. Terrible idea. But it ended up working out. So that basically, more on the serious side for Rust, we knew that to be 1.0 in 2010 or 2015, we had to have a package manager. There was no other option. There had actually already been a Cargo in Rust. It had been deleted to then rewrite a different package manager called Rust Package, which was also deleted. So then we ended up having Cargo. And so that was sort of by necessity. We had to have something. And I was the sweet summer child victim on the side saying, all right, you're the one going to work on this. So ended up being a lot of fun. I loved working on it just in terms of the problems it was solving. I loved the idea of kind of developing these conventions to make everyone's lives easier, make it kind of more consistent across the Rust ecosystem, super easy to explore, super easy to build. I loved building in very critical things nowadays, more like cross-compilation, getting all that right, especially when you have like proc macros and other various like build scripts and fun things like that. And it was also a lot of fun just kind of taking everyone's use cases for what they do in their packages or what they need to actually build and kind of fold that all in, kind of figure out how to actually design that well. And the idiomatic in Rust, idiomatic easy to use, all that fun stuff. So it kind of snowballed generally over time. I ended up doing quite a lot of work on Cargo that was actually originally incepted by two other folks, and I took over it afterwards. And then it just kind of snowballed from there and was a lot of fun. Oh, speed, that was the other one. I really enjoyed optimizing. I've always been a fan of optimizing stuff, and if I type Cargo build or Cargo run, and Cargo itself took more than 100 milliseconds, I was like, no, I gotta work on that. Gotta optimize that, add some caching, add some faster paths, take out some clones, all that fun stuff.
And what were some of your inspirations? We alluded to it earlier, but how did you think about, like, where did you learn? I mean, you're a sweet summer child, 1 year out of school, let's go for it. Presumably you looked around a little bit. I'm curious what that process was like.
Yeah, definitely. I was, I think, I remember I looked a lot at Bundler. Bundler was one at the time, because I think Yehuda was actually one who kind of did a lot of the initial design for Cargo. And then also just, I'd used NPM, I'd used Yarn, or maybe, I don't think Yarn existed at the time, but all those sorts of things about like make and CMake, what not to do in those regards and all that fun stuff. So I was probably not as thorough as I should have been of like actually digging in code and like actually reviewing things. Like Charlie was saying, I didn't actually go and like reach out to other folks, although I very much should have.
Well, you guys can start a support group after this, now that you all know each other. Okay, very cool. So that's a little bit of how you guys got started, which to me is like really fascinating. Maybe tell us about, and the state of things today in your mind, and this doesn't have to be like you're actively involved in the project today. It's more like the state of package management. Obviously in your respective ecosystems, you might have a little more domain expertise, but broadly I'm curious, and we'll just keep snaking. So we'll start with Alex. Like, how do you feel about where package managers are today? And don't talk about where they'll go, because that's my next and last question. That's all I've got left. So,
oh, that's a good question. I feel like where they are today, I feel like is a pretty good spot. I feel like there's the question of like, should we reinvent a package manager for every ecosystem? And I feel like, at least personally, I've come to the conclusion I think that's a pretty good idea, in the sense that the language idiosyncrasies, language idioms are so different. There's a ton of shared stuff we can all do at the same time. Like JavaScript can be the same as Cargo, or Rust can be the same as Python, can be the same as Ruby, all that good stuff. Like, we can all do generally the same thing, but it's still a really good idea to kind of keep everyone. There are features of Python, there are features of JavaScript. Like, there's not really a native extension idea for Rust because it's all native code in general, but there is very much so for Python and JavaScript, things like that. So I would say, like, in that sense, I think that's worked out pretty well. I think it's worked out pretty well that every language kind of has their own package manager, kind of everyone's learning from everyone else at this point, and building on that, especially on the speed aspects, kind of really focusing on that has been really good. But I do still think there's a lot to learn still in the kind of the registry aspect. Every language has their own registry. Every language has their own like kind of major central thing. We've got Crates.io, there's PyPI, there's npmjs.org. Kind of all of these, those are like kind of the main central hubs. And I feel like it's always worked out really well, but I think there's still kind of stuff to do in that regard of kind of making it a little bit easier to set one up, a little bit easier of kind of what you expect across ecosystems. A huge one for Rust is that we don't have namespaces. I know that's kind of coming down with RFCs and kind of coming in the works, but there's still, and there's a lot of stuff you can do with each registry that you can't quite do with other registries. So kind of improving the experience there, I feel like is a major thing.
Charlie, current state of package management.
Yeah, I think, well, in Python at least, like, it's very fragmented. I think there's a push to try and consolidate more tooling. So like for any one thing you want to do in Python, there are like 10 different options and you need like 10 different tools. So I think that leads to a lot of user confusion. And it was resonating a lot when people were talking in the last panel about like, you become an expert in something and it becomes much harder to like remember why it's hard and what's hard about it. And I've had to do that a lot with Python packaging because I didn't know really like anything about Python packaging like a year and a half, 2 years ago. And now I like know I have all this knowledge, which like it's not clear whether it's useful or not, but it does mean that it's much harder for me to remember like, oh, why do I need these 4 different tools? And like, I now know those 4 different tools that you need, like they actually do all exist for a good reason. They can like do a different thing. They are actually different, but from the eyes of someone who hasn't spent all this time like reading the PEPs and like digging into the source code, like they seem like the same thing. Why do I need them all? So, that's a big part of what we're trying to do is like build a more consolidated tool chain. So make it so hopefully you don't need 10 different tools to do, hopefully you don't need 10 different tools to do whatever you're doing. Hopefully you can just use, our tool chain, like the bundling and bringing things together. The other thing I'm seeing a lot of is like, and I like it, but there's more in Python in particular, like Python has always been this way, but it's growing more and more that you have more and more extension modules. Like you have more and more native code. Like when you're writing Python and when you're running Python code, more and more you're actually running C++, you're actually running Rust. Like that is more and more popular. And I think like the arc of what we're seeing is like Rust interoperability has gotten really good in Python. I see more and more stuff where Python kind of acts as this glue layer or this front end for like other high performance systems. And I think a lot of the investments that we'll see in packaging will be around that. Will be around how do you bundle native code, make it easier for people to build extension modules, make it easier for people to write really high performance code that gets exposed to the end user through a package manager and through a programming language. Like hopefully Python.
No, that's totally right. I think Dima from PyTorch will be here later, I'm pretty sure. And we were talking about this, and I can't remember why we were having a discussion about PyTorch and Python. He's like, it's mostly not Python. And obviously the interface is, and even the branding is, but in practice for performance reasons, a lot of it is rewritten in C and C++.
I know you told me not to talk about the future. And then
you did it a little bit. It's okay. I'm now going to hand over to Isaac. Since we're snaking, I'll let Isaac give the current state and particularly with a soon to be launched package manager, his views of the future, and then we'll wrap with everyone else going back the other way.
Cool. Yeah. The thing that always stands out to me, and I think package management is a great example of this. A lot of times there's, in a language community, in an open source project, and just in general, like in society, right? There'll be some problem, and we all have our kind of like, there's an effect that happens by having to always route around this problem. So for example, in a lot of systems, publishing to a package management repository was traditionally very hard, right? You needed to register a namespace, and that had to be approved, and every publish had to like go through some process or something like that. And with NPM, I was like, well, what if we don't do that? There was also what people think of as the word dependency hell now has a completely different meaning than it did before I wrote NPM. Like once upon a time, dependency hell meant I'm installing these 2 different things. They both depend on some third thing, but at different versions. And so they conflict because of something I've never heard of. I get this error message I can't possibly know how to fix. NPM solves that. It lets you just have both of those 2 copies of the dep in your tree and just nests them and does its best to kind of deduplicate, but it's like, whatever, memory's cheap, right? Well, that made it real easy. You don't need these kitchen sink dependencies anymore. You can have a dependency that's 1 line of JavaScript code, and you don't have to write that line again. It's easy, it's great. And so now what that's meant is that people kept writing smaller and smaller and smaller packages, and now when you run npm install, you get 8, 10, 12,000 things getting installed. So every problem is sort of at the same time a solution to some other problem because it's preventing you from encountering that other problem, right? You knock down a wall and then you get to run into the next one. And so, I think where we're at with JavaScript package management right now, NPM is It's just too slow. I mean, it's admirably backwards compatible. That was always kind of a project objective, to not kind of split the ecosystem. It's incredibly stable, and it's incredibly, like robust, and it will do the correct thing way more than almost any other package management system you could want. But it's slow because it's got affordances for stuff from like node version 4 or whatever. So I think that's not quite true now. They do drop old versions more than we used to. But I think that because people are relying on code from the ecosystem so much more, and they're doing that in part because we made it easy, right? You used to have to write all your own code and not use open source because using open source was a huge pain in the ass. It's not anymore, so people are relying on it a lot, and that brings with it different problems. One of the big problems there is it takes a long time to install all that stuff. And 99.7% of like the average JavaScript application is not authored by the people who are writing the application. It's authored by like rando NPM people on the internet. And so, yeah, I mean, that's why we're focusing with Volt on just speed and correctness, and really even maybe shaving the edges off of correctness here and there where we think we can get away with it to eke out a little bit more speed, because that's just what people care about. That's the problem we have now. Once we make it fast, it's like the goldfish. It's going to grow to fill the space that we make for it. I'm sure in 5 years' time, people will be like, well, how come Volt gets slow when I have over 50,000 deps in my tree? I'll be like, well, because, I don't know. That's the new limit, I guess. It's just how it goes. So I think the future is going to look a lot like the present and the past. We're all going to stay human and keep doing dumb things.
I'm excited.
Inspiring.
For that. Yeah, I'm really excited for that.
Charlie, go ahead. And then Alex.
Future?
Yeah.
The future? I mean, I think like one of the things that we want to do for sure in Python is like, a lot of Python packaging tools historically have been quite low level. Like if most people are using pip, like pip is actually like a pretty low level tool in my opinion. Like you're like looking at the environment and you're saying like add this one package, remove this one package, like do this thing. And we're trying to move towards like UV supports those kinds of operations, but we're trying to move towards like higher level tools and also like higher confidence tools. This is something I think about a lot with Rust. Like my main feeling when I use Rust tooling is like, I'm really confident. Like if I clone a repository and I run like cargo build, I'm very confident it will actually work. And like that's actually a very rare thing, I think. Like most ecosystems, that is not true. And like for us, like we're just trying to build like higher and higher confidence tooling over time. Like that's a lot of what we want to do. Like things that just work and where you don't have to know all the intricacies of the project or know all the intricacies of the tool. Like you just clone the project and you do run, and then we just set everything up for you. So trying to make things easier for users by like bundling more stuff, I think is part of what we want to accomplish at least.
Very cool. Alex?
I think I'd say two things. Number one would be supply chain security. We have a lot to go on that front. This whole idea of you got thousands of dependencies, that's pervasive in every software ecosystem now. And supply chain security is not really a solved problem in terms of how do you actually vet all those, how do you actually review all those. There's a lot of prior work to build on, a lot of new work to be able to build on, integrate in everyone's ecosystem. And the other one was you're mentioning native extensions, and I think a major aspect is going to be cross-language package management. So that's kind of like a microcosm of one thing of taking native code, putting it in Python, putting it in Ruby, putting it in JavaScript. But I think the idea of using one language from another is sort of an untapped potential in terms of I think we'll see a lot more stuff like that in the future, just making that a lot easier to take that like super popular JavaScript library and use that in Rust or vice versa.
Very cool. And before I have you all clap for them politely and introduce the next panel, I just want to take an extra moment to say there's a couple other people I didn't mention with wonderful open source projects. I couldn't catch everyone, but Evan, who's speaking next with Vite and Vue. There was like a Python core committee meeting that was happening over here on the corner. I noticed at some point the UV Loop and Async IO folks, but Guido said he wouldn't come, and it's fine. I'll deal with them later. But it's just a great group. So please get to know each other, go up and say hello to each other, be nice to each other, and do it especially across languages, across ecosystems. They'll have a support group after this, hopefully without too much substance abuse. And we'll go from there. But thank you all so much. We really appreciate it, and we'll do the next panel.